Rob here. In this video we're going to be looking at Assassin's Creed audience and fandom. Now just to remind you, you're only going to get questions on Assassin's Creed or video games in section B, and of the subject content of this video we're specifically looking at the audience section. So as you can see, learners will study media audiences, considering aspects such as targeting of mass and specialized audiences, the categorization and construction of audiences, as well as how audiences' use of and response to the media affect identity in social, cultural, and historical circumstances. So we're looking at how audiences are grouped and categorized by age, gender, social class, lifestyle, taste, etc. We'll be looking at how audiences are targeted, attracted, reached, and addressed, and potentially constructed. We're going to be looking at how media industries target audiences through the content and appeal of the media products and through the ways they're marketed, distributed, and circulated. We'll look at the interrelationships between media technologies and pattern consumption response. We'll look at how audiences interpret the media and how different audiences may interpret it in different ways. We'll look at how audiences interact with the media and how they can be actively involved in media production. We'll look at specialized audiences and how they can be reached on national and global scales, especially through technology and different platforms. We'll look at how audiences are reflected in the needs of mass specialized audiences through targeting by organizations. We're looking at how audiences use media in different ways to reflect demographic factors, as well as aspects of identity and cultural capital. We'll also look at the difference between niche and fan audiences compared to the mainstream. And we'll look at the way in which audiences interpret, reflect social, cultural, and historical circumstances. So theory-wise, the key theory we need to be thinking about here is Henry Jenkins and fandom. He points out that audiences are not passive consumers. Fans are active participants in the construction and circulation of textual meanings. This obviously ties in with Stuart Hall and his reception theory, your preferred dominant hegemonic readings, or your negotiated readings, or your oppositional readings. So some people will come up with negotiated readings of their media products. I mean, a classic example that will be a so-called queer reading or gay reading into something that was never intended to be gay in the first place. The idea that fans appropriate text and read them in ways that are not fully authorized by the media producers is called textual poaching. People will take their favorite fandoms and they will manipulate them for their own needs. They will perhaps create their own media products, fan art, fan literature, cosplay, all this kind of stuff, right? And that the fans construct their social and cultural identities through borrowing and reflecting mass culture images that are part of participatory culture as well as a vital social dimension. So we're talking about fan culture and how fandoms can bring people together. They've got a social dimension. You can meet other people with the same interests as you, whether that be in real life or online. And they can be a really powerful part of a person's identity. And this is true not just of video games and other media texts, whether it be something very mainstream like Harry Potter or Star Trek or Star Wars, or something incredibly niche, ways people reinvent and reevaluate things like bronies, which are grown-up male fans of My Little Pony. So we've got these kinds of audience responses as well. So that's the kind of thing we'll be looking at. It also ties in with David Gauntlet's theory of identity, this idea that the media provides us with the tools and resources we use to construct our identity. So people might construct their entire identity around their fandom. This is true of media, let's say Harry Potter, as it is with football. There's very little difference between being an obsessive Sheffield Wednesday fan as there is of being an obsessive Star Trek fan. The idea that whilst in the past the media tended to convey singular, straightforward messages about ideal types of male and female identities, the media today offers us a more diverse range of styles, icons, and characters from whom we may pick and mix different ideas. That's going to be particularly relevant to Assassin's Creed. We've also got Clay Shirky, this idea of the end of audience. The idea that the internet and digital technology have a profound effect on the relationship between media and individuals. The idea that conceptualization of an audience members as passive consumers of mass media content is no longer tenable in the age of the internet, as media consumers have now become producers who can speak back to the media in various ways, as well as creating and sharing content with one another. Very important for fan cultures. Fandom, of course, is amplified by the internet, where you can find your tribe of like-minded individuals in a much more global context. So, you could have friends from everywhere in the globe because you've been brought together by your shared love of your particular fandom. That's especially true if your particular fandom is very, very niche. As we've already pointed out, the idea that video games are A, something that's aimed at children, B, something that's aimed at males specifically, is not really true anymore. Video gaming has gone from being a relatively niche activity, let's say 40 years ago, to something that is incredibly mainstream. It is one of the main entertainment forms in today's day and age. People from almost every age demographic play video games, and it's especially prevalent in 21 to 50-year-olds. And at least half the people in the country are active, regular gamers. So the idea that it's a niche audience is not true, right? Equally, the Assassin's Creed franchise is one of the most popular game franchises of all time. So we can't talk about Assassin's Creed as a niche product. We've talked about ownership of games consoles. As we can see, they're largely younger users, 16 to 24-year-olds, 43%. So, a significant proportion of young people own games consoles. Anywhere between 68 and 87% of people use computers. So video gaming, again, the devices, like a games console is specifically a gaming machine, unlike a computer, which is a much more of a black box convergence device. Yeah, games consoles do that nowadays. You can use your games console to watch Blu-rays, to watch DVDs, to listen to CDs if you're particularly old school. But you can also use it to get onto Netflix, get onto Amazon, get onto YouTube. Computers are designed to do that from the offset. And let's face it, yes, you can do those things on a games console, but you're less likely to do that, I would argue. Although for many people, a games console is their primary entertainment hub. That's, I personally bought my PlayStation 3 as a Blu-ray player, not as a games console. And it's a good way to turn your dumb TV into a smart television. But since smart TVs, as we can see, have got much more market penetration now with, knocking on half as many of people having one, well, it means that games consoles are less likely to be used as a all-in-one hub, unless it's in a second TV, for example. We've already talked about the fact that this is considered to be the target demographic for Assassin's Creed 3. Not Liberation, specifically Assassin's Creed 3. Male, 25 to 39, ABC1. If they've got a monthly disposable income of 125 to 499 pounds, then this is largely saying C1B more than A, because they've got that much disposable income. In general, the target audience for video games generally is male, 25 to 39, but C2, D, and E, less than £125 a month to spend on disposable income, essentially. But as we can see, 45.8% of the average video gamers are 25 to 39, and 27.1, 18 to 24, 18.7 are 45 to 54. So as they get older, it gets progressively, well, actually, no. Yeah, over the age of 40, it's still, nearly a fifth of people are regular video gamers. And specifically, C2, D, E are our main demographics as well. 54.6 C2, D, and E. But that's not a massive difference. About 5% is generally considered significantly different. This is closer to 10%. But you're still looking at 45. That's nearly half of ABC ones are gamers. Or half of gamers are ABC ones, I should say. So that all that tells us is it's a very mainstream activity. Just to remind you about the PAMCO National Reader Survey categorizations. So if we're talking C2, D, and E, we're talking working class people basically. Skilled manual workers at C2, thinking of the mechanics or factory foremen, stuff like that. Semi-skilled and unskilled manual workers, that's 15%. Pensioners, unemployed, state benefits, people on 0-hour contracts, etc. They're going to be E. C1, B, and A, they are your sort of like your middle management, basically, low middle class and middle class. Doesn't really count for the particularly rich, I suppose. They might be the top 1% or even 2%. It's a big gap between them and the bottom of A. So A's got a massive difference on it. This isn't related to money, of course, it's related to your job. As I've already said, 54.6% of gamers are C2D and E. As I already talked about, not a massive difference there. We also need to consider the psychometric audiences from Young and Rubicam. So if we're talking C2, D, and E, we're mainly looking at the mainstreamers and the strugglers. These may not have the latest, most up-to-date consoles. Maybe they're still got their PlayStation 3 or their Xbox 360. Maybe they're on a newer generation like PlayStation 4. Maybe they bought their console second-hand. They probably haven't got the money for the latest up-to-date consoles, or if they have, maybe they bought them on credit. Because as expensive as games consoles are, and as expensive as video games are, they're actually a pretty cost-effective entertainment form. When you consider the amount of time you might spend playing a video game, which might, even if you play it quickly, might take 70 hours to complete. For 70 quid to buy the game, that's 10 quid an hour. And that's reasonably cheap in comparison to other forms of entertainment. Same with mainstreamers. I mean, they are, again, the mainstream. We've already talked about gaming being a mainstream technology. So these people tend to be C2D and E, maybe C1, or even B for the mainstreamer, but, people like value for money, essentially. They don't like taking risks. If they don't like taking risks, maybe they're more likely to be fans of franchises because they don't want to risk their money on something they don't know. In terms of ABC ones, we've also got what's called the early adopter. Early adopters are people who buy brand new technologies in particular as soon as they come out because they want the latest, newest, most up-to-date technology. The aspirer buys these things because they're expensive and it's sort of like they're desirable. They like to invest in luxury goods. They want to be on trend. They want the latest stuff. Gives them status. Explorers are attracted by new and innovative brands, products, and experiences to seek discovery. So again, they might be the kind of people who are into the latest technology, who want to try new things. So maybe they'd be more likely to be in indie games and stuff rather than Assassin's Creed, but they might be buying these things because they're new. Think about that with the Vita, for example. This theory comes from a guy called E.M. Roger. It's called Everett M. Rogers' Bell Curve of the Innovation Adoption Life Cycle. It doesn't just apply to technology. It talks about where in a technology's lifespan people are likely to buy it. Innovators are the people who invent that technology. They're the people who are in at the really ground floor. They're about 2.5% of the population. Early adopters are the people who buy stuff as soon as it comes out. They want the latest, newest stuff. So innovators might be the people who get involved in the beta stage. They might pay for access to the beta stage of a video game to help, um, iron out all the bugs. An early adopter will buy it on its release day, even though it might still have some bugs in it. Early majority, they'll wait a couple of weeks, wait for the bugs to be ironed out. Maybe, especially with games console like the PlayStation 5 and the new Xboxes, they were very hard to get hold of. Late majority of people are going to get it after it's been out a while, and laggards are going to get it, well, way after it's sort of like moved on to the next generation, probably. People will be buying like PlayStation 4s now, even though the PlayStation 5 is out, because the PlayStation 4 is cheaper. So the C2D&Es might be in your laggard category, or your late majority, because they can't afford to buy them when they first come out and have to wait for them to come down in price. Or they're perfectly happy with the one they've got and don't need a new one. Especially as the variety and choice of games on the newer consoles aren't what they used to be. Now, Assassin's Creed franchise are what we call AAA games. They can be written AAA or as AAA. AAA titles are those made and distributed by mid-sized or major publishers and have a higher development and marketing costs than other tiers of games. They represent the premium titles and brands of those publishers. They're often long-running franchises across various platforms. Assassin's Creed definitely fits into that, right? So this would make it one of the bigger, more popular titles, and therefore arguably mainstream. It's mass audience. As we said, the Assassin's Creed franchise is the 14th highest selling game franchise of all time. It sold over 155 million copies worldwide. That's mainstream, right? That's mass. 155 million of anything is mass, all right? It includes 12 mainline releases, several spin-offs. It's been expanded into a cross-media franchise. It includes comic books, encyclopedias, novels, live-action films, an upcoming TV and show and anime. It's got live symphonic performances. It's got every kind of merchandise you can slap their name on. This makes it mainstream within the gaming community. Now, does mainstream within the gaming community translate into mainstream in the wider community? Now, that's a different argument. We've already said that, 50% of people in this country are regular gamers. So you could argue, yes. But is Assassin's Creed as well known as the biggest games franchises? So there are franchises like Mario, Tetris, Pokemon, Call of Duty, Super Mario, Grand Theft Auto, FIFA, Minecraft, Lego, The Sims. These are the top 10 most famous video game franchises. Assassin's Creed is nowhere near that popular. Ask yourself, your gran might have heard of those games, right? Will she have heard of Assassin's Creed franchise? I don't know. Maybe your nan's a hardcore gamer. Maybe she's in several guilds online, right? Maybe she plays tournament level Warcraft. I don't know, right? But nonetheless, is this something that is going to be a widespread, famous franchise, right? Interestingly, this is the list of the biggest game franchises, but Pokemon is the biggest media franchise of all time. Is even higher than Mickey Mouse, right? But I guess that includes the wider Pokemon franchise, including like the playing cards and all the other merchandise, not just the games. Now, when Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation came out in 2012, the gaming industry was different to where it is now. At the time, and this is from a news report at the time, Sony has confirmed is planning to target, with the upcoming release of the PlayStation Vita, lots of audiences from the regular core gamer to even the female demographic, which in the minds of PlayStation Europe boss Jim Ryan is the untapped holy grail of gaming. Back in 2012, video gaming was very much seen as primarily male activity. That was 10 years ago. things have changed since then. As we can see from figures we saw earlier, women make up at least 48% of gamers, and in some cases I've seen figures that say that women actually play games more than men do. Are they interested in the more hardcore gaming, or are they interested in more playing things on their phone? Quite possibly, but there are still loads of hardcore female gamers out there, right? But in those days, girls were not seen as being gamers and they weren't being targeted. Now, how is this trying to target girls, right? Well, the first thing is Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation has a female protagonist. So we can link that to Henry Jenkins and David Gauntlet, and we can say that this is a more diverse representation for audiences to base their identity on, right? This does bring up wider questions about how we identify with our video game avatars. You know, are girls more likely to play a video game if it's got a female protagonist? Are boys less likely to play it if it's got a female protagonist, or do people not really care? A lot of modern video games, of course, give you the option about what gender you want to have your main character, and you've got a lot of customization options on your character. You can make them look in, however you want them to in many respects. They can be male, they can be female. Increasingly, they can be non-gendered, and if there's a romantic subplot in the game, you can choose whether you're going to romance male or female characters or anything in between. That's a fairly recent development. So in those days, that was unusual in video gaming, and it was particularly unusual in that franchise. So it's an appeal to a different demographic. This ties in with Hesmer Gulch and the idea of minimizing risk and maximizing audiences. So the existence of a female protagonist could also be discussed in terms of constructing audiences by asking whether this game might offer a platform for female gamer identification. As I said, are girls more likely to play the game if it's got a female main character? This ties in with Gauntlet and Jenkins, more diverse representation of audiences to base their identity on. So, this was a deliberate attempt to appeal more to female gamers, or to get women into gaming. We also might discuss, of course, the fact that it's a black main character, right? In fact, I think she was mixed race, half black, half white. This was also an attempt at diversification because there weren't that many black characters in video games in those days either. I mean, they were around, but not that many. In terms of wider culture, we can start looking at fan culture, right? So, for people like Jenkins and Shirky, video games offer social experiences. The idea that a video game is something you play on your own in a darkened room in your parents' basement, for example, because you're a social outcast, isn't true anymore. I mean, it's true for some people. But there's a social dimension to video gaming, right? Obviously, it's online gaming and multiplayer options where you can play against other people. You've got headsets now, you can talk to them while you're doing it. You can join guilds and clans where you all play together on a regular basis. So they offer social experiences as well as communities outside of the core gaming experience, or participatory culture, Jenkins would call it. So it's not just about social interactions within the gameplay, but within the wider fan culture, whether it be online or in real life. Fans can also be the most passionate exponents of a game or the harshest critics, and that can often impact on the development of games directly. If a game is getting a lot of bad mouthing out of the fans, then that's bad news for any brand. So this ties in closely with Shirky's identity, the idea of audiences being able to speak back. As you can see here, we've got an example of a frequently asked questions forum about Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation, where people are complaining about how buggy it is and how many problems it's got in it and how easy it is to get stuck in it. There's some person there says, should I sell my Vita? Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation, is it worth it? Yeah? Didn't go down particularly well with audiences, this game, because it was a bit of a dog's dinner when it first came out, at least. Then we've got the more participatory culture elements of it, this idea of fandom and fan culture. And as Henry Jenkins said, fans are active participants in the construction of circulation of media text. Textual poaching it's called. So here we've got an example of cosplay. People who are cosplay is often a compound word from costume and play. So it's people either dressing up as their favorite characters. Now, this can either mean buying a costume, and you can do that. I mean, there are loads of places where you can literally buy ready-made costumes for any kind of fandom you want. But a lot of people find it more important to make their costumes. It's part of this maker culture, this idea that people get pleasure from making things themselves as a kind of self-expression. Obviously, this is now heavily tied up with things like TikTok and Instagram, where the idea of cosplay has become a major kind of entertainment. And there are people who've become, you know, viral internet sensations because of their cosplay. There's also the element of this of going to things like conventions and showing off your creations. We've also got this idea of fan art. Now, people will do paintings and drawings of their favorite characters in ways that are often not fully authorized by the media producers. And that's called textual poaching. A good example of this is shipping. Shipping is short for relationship. It's where you get people together, right, who aren't meant to be together necessarily or aren't together already. I mean, this can be done in real life when you're setting your friends up with one another. But in media, it's basically about taking two characters who don't otherwise have a romantic relationship and giving them one. Again, a lot of this is unauthorized. This goes back to, I mean, this goes way, way back. I mean, people were doing this in the 1900s for Sherlock Holmes. But a lot of modern fandom goes back to Star Trek in the 1960s and 70s. Shipping kind of started with a lot of sort of like gay fan fiction, which imagined a relationship between Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock. So that was the key origins of this. But as you can see, all these fan drawings creating a relationship between the main characters of Assassin's Creed 3 and Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation. Then there's fan fiction, people writing their own fan stories based on their favourite characters and their favourite franchises. The internet is full of this stuff. This one's called Winter in the North. A missing informant leads Aveline de Grand Prix to the north and back to the side of Ratolhake. I don't know, something like that. I mean, this is, the internet's full of this stuff. I mean, people love writing their own fan fiction, some of which is thousands upon thousands of words long. Then there's fan films. I'm not going to play this year. I'll put them in the playlist. But, Lego trailers are a classic where people do stop motion Lego movies of their favorite franchises, maybe copying trailers or, scenes from their favorite films, TV shows, etc. They make their own fan films, some of which have got incredibly good production values that are professional standard in terms of special effects and cinematography and everything, props, costumes, mise en scène, a lot. Again, I'll put these in the playlist. You can go and watch them yourself. Then there's the idea of conventions, your Comic Cons and stuff like that, where people can get together in real life, IRL, in meat space instead of cyberspace. So this participatory culture, I mean, look, we've got an entire group of people there in the fandom of Assassin's Creed who have came dressed up in cosplay. Again, both Jenkins and Shirky, this idea of being able to speak back. The actual Assassin's Creed Ubisoft website has got its own fan forum. There's loads of unofficial ones as well. Not to mention, in fact, don't forget the social media. Twitch, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. All of these give fans the ability to speak back. So this is the official Ubisoft forums section of their website. Don't forget Twitch. Twitch is a big thing now as well. This idea of people live streaming themselves playing video games, and that can attract massive audiences. Then we've got the entire reception theory attitude to this. What's unusual about Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation is the game takes place in 18th century Louisiana from 1765 to 1777. This is against the backdrop of the aftermath of the French Indian Wars and leading up to the 1776 American Revolutionary War, the War of Independence, when they got independence from Britain. But Louisiana, in the south of America, was a French colony, and the French colonizers have been fighting the Native American population. Also, of course, this is at the height of colonialism and the height of slavery. And your main character, Aveline de Grand Prix, is a mixed race character. So this is a positive and very unusual for the time representation of women and people of colour in video games. In those days, it was very unusual to have female game protagonists, let alone black ones. And the narrative itself deals with issues of intersectionality. Remember, this is a theory by Kimberly Crenshaw, but we can talk about it in relationship to Bell Hooks as our key theorist. This idea that, as a character who is wealthy and mixed race, she has some of the social advantages of her wealth and social status, but her colour of her skin also gives her disadvantages, as does her gender. What's quite unusual as well is that it was very common, and still very common, that female characters in video games are hypersexualized for a male gaze, an assumed male gaze, because, especially in those days, men were still the key video game audience. Lara Croft would be a classic example of a sexualized video game character that was still very popular at the time. And Aveline de Grand Prix is not sexualized in that way, or at least nowhere near as much. This can be seen as a positive step and perhaps another way to try and attract female gamers. So that was kind of like your preferred reading, essentially. Soraya Murray, who's the assistant professor of film and digital media at the University of California, Santa Cruz, applauded Assassin's Creed Liberation for rebelling against the game industry standard and said this transcends the game to a cultural study. So it might not be the greatest of games, but it's a very interesting game to study. She seems to have hope that the game would inspire other developers to include female and African American main characters. She points out the use of different personas as a clever mechanism to capitalize on her race to enhance her ability to free slaves. So within the game, you can dress in different ways. If you want to move freely about society and be above suspicion, you can dress in, your finery and walk around town as a member of the elite. Or if you want the ultimate in stealth, you could dress yourself up as a slave and go around unnoticed, and that, because they're completely below anyone's paying attention to, and it helps you to free the slaves, which is one of the main missions of the game. So that is a brief rundown on some of the fan culture issues that we can talk about for this game. Again, the links to all those videos that are in this PowerPoint, which I'm not going to show you now, will be in the playlist, and you can go and watch those separately. So, if you've got any questions, you know where I am. Other than that, I'll see you in the next one.